Well, joining me to debate all this is Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem, Coleman Hughes, host of Conversations with Coleman at the Free Press, Kyle Kulinski, a.k.a. Secular Talk, and Michael Knowles, host of the Daily Wire's Michael Knowles.
They thought America First actually meant America First. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that.
Be friends with the world. Don't get into entangling alliances. Don't search for monsters to destroy, to fight unnecessary wars.
We're getting different signals from Trump depending on the day, different signals from Rubio, and anyone who's confidently prognosticating that they know which path we're going down probably doesn't know what they're talking about.
By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran.
And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point.
Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle the taint for the rest of your fucking life?
The regime is still in place. What we did was depose the leader. We left the vice president in place, and we said, act in a way that is appropriate in accordance with the law and our interests, or we're going to kill you.
They don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism, where they say, we're going to take the oil, and the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires.
The idea that we would go flirting with multiple wars of choice at this point, it's not left-wing or right-wing. It's just reckless.
We don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations.
You recognize that we've been an empire since the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And we've been a muscular global empire since the Second World War.
And, you know, obviously it's true, Piers, as you said, and we all know Donald Trump will say all types of crazy things and then never follow through with that. But he also just asked Congress for a $1.5 trillion defense budget.
And obviously in Venezuela, he's been talking about taking Greenland and even invading America's evil top hat, Canada, though I think he's mostly joking about that one.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another Piers Morgan Uncensored, where we're going to be debating Trump on the world stage, folks, and pretty much everything that Donald Trump is doing. We've got Dave Smith coming in. We've got Michael Knowles, Kyle Kulinski. So this is going to be fun. I'm going to be honest about this. The left does not have a very good showing on this. Dave Smith and Michael Knowles, they have a pretty good back and forth throughout this entire thing. So it's going to be pretty good. So get prepared for that. And, you know, I just want to say to anybody out there, do me a favor, smash that like button for me, subscribe if you're new around here, share this video anywhere and everywhere you can, click the join button, sign up and become a member. That's the best way to help this channel expand and grow, folks. And without any further ado, here's the debate.
No.
Okay.
I mean, Piers, it's, as you said, you know, Donald Trump can say America First means whatever I say it means, but if America First meant one thing to everybody who's ever uttered the phrase, and then he wants to change that to mean America First means regime changes all around the world, huge, enormous, unthinkable bloated defense budgets like he just requested from Congress. And if he's going to think that none of his supporters are going to have a problem with that, or that they're all just going to change their views because he decided to change his, I think he's going to find out how well that works for him in the midterms this year. And I think it's going to be a disaster. And, you know, obviously it's true, Piers, as you said, and we all know Donald Trump will say all types of crazy things and then never follow through with that. But he also just asked Congress for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. And that, to me, does indicate that he is anticipating a real deal war coming up, or at least the possibility of it. And if he means the things that he says, I mean, I don't exactly know how you do that. I don't know how you say we run Venezuela and we'll dictate who the next regime is and we'll dictate where the oil goes without at least an effort of like 100,000 troops. I'm not even sure that would be enough to do it. So it's unclear what exactly the next move is going to be, and that's really when we'll find out what he's going to do. But no, Piers, the idea that we're 38 or maybe 39 by the end of the show trillion dollars in debt right now. We have major problems in this country, and we have a hot war raging on in Europe, which is a proxy war between the entire West and the biggest nuclear armed power in the history of the world. The idea that we would go flirting with multiple wars of choice at this point, it's not left-wing or right-wing, it's just reckless. There's no wisdom in it.
Michael Knowles, I guess the argument against what Trump is doing is that many people who voted for Trump bought into the concept that what America first was take care of what's happening in your own backyard and stop meddling in foreign affairs. And now they're waking up almost on a daily basis to seeing Donald Trump proudly and aggressively talking about meddling in all sorts of foreign affairs. Is there a contradiction or hypocrisy or even a betrayal of voters going on here?
Not at all. First of all, Venezuela is in our own backyard, and it's been the policy of the United States in 1803 to manage the Western Hemisphere. So that, that's a cornerstone of American foreign policy. I think it is charming that Dave is defining America first in the way that he prefers, and I think there are plenty of people who wish to do that. But Dave, though a very popular podcaster, never won a presidential election, and Trump has been clear on what he means by America first, the political movement that he built, that people voted for in his coalition since the beginning. President Trump campaigned the first time around on destroying ISIS, so obviously that does not mean that America is only going to look inward. President Trump has carried out attacks, military operations that were extremely successful in Iran, in Syria, in Afghanistan, obviously in Venezuela. He's been talking about taking Greenland and even invading America's evil top hat, Canada, though I think he's mostly joking about that one, since the beginning. So that's what that means. And what it comes down to is that America is a global empire. We just are. People can be upset about that, but unless your geopolitics comes strictly from Reddit, if your geopolitics actually comes from history, you recognize that we've been an empire since the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And we've been a muscular global empire since the Second World War. So President Trump's vision, I think, actually rejects two extremes. It rejects a conservative isolationism, and it rejects a liberal internationalism, and it posits a conservative imperialism that says that we are going to recognize our role in the world, but we are going to pursue that role in limited ways with America's interest at heart. So there's been no regime change in Venezuela. We're talking about regime change in Venezuela. The regime is still in place. What we did was depose the leader. We left the vice president in place, and we said, act in a way that is appropriate in accordance with the law and our interests, or we're going to kill you. That's very different than a Bushy-era neocon regime change in Iraq. Even when we're talking about Iran, the Trump administration has not gone in a particularly overt way yet. But even there, we would be talking about a restoration of the Pahlavi regime, most likely, that goes back to 1925. So I grant there are all sorts of risks to interventions, but we're the global empire, and frankly, even the American Revolution comes out of wars of global empire. It comes out of the 7 Years' War, which itself was a derivation of the War of Austrian Succession. To pretend that we don't have a role in geopolitics is to ignore all of American history.
Okay, Carl Kalinske, I can see you grimacing through a lot of what Michael was saying there. You said Trump says the US will run Venezuela and he threatens Colombia and Mexico, arrest this psychotic motherfucker. Before I get you to expand on that thesis, the point I was making to Dave, if I want to elaborate on where I sit with this, because I've had a bit of time to look at this play out, is you look at Maduro. Everyone thought, my God, this is going to be World War III. Actually, Maduro is going to end up in a New York courtroom and he's been got rid of. Everyone seems to agree that's a good thing for not just the Venezuelan people, but the world. No American troops died in what was an incredibly efficient surgical military strike to get him out of there. And if you have a more compliant leader of Venezuela, albeit part of the same regime, that can probably only be a good thing. If you look at the argument about Greenland, for example, I've been struck by some of the people that I didn't expect to think this was a good idea. It was a British general last week talking about this, saying that from a strategic security point of view, it would make perfect sense for America to have Greenland. And is there a deal to be done? He didn't think invading it was the right thing, and nor do I. But is there a deal to be done with 60,000 people who live in Greenland that could actually improve the security of the United States and the West against the obvious threat from China and Russia and so on? And I can go through the others. Iran, getting rid of the Ayatollah and the mullahs is unquestionably a good thing for the world. It's how you do these things and whether you plan and prepare properly for what follows next that I think are the debatable points. And history says that's normally, unfortunately, been very badly done. But this is what I meant when I said to Dave that I understand the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America first actually meant America first. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
Okay, so Dave brings up some good points. Kyle Kalinski's just a deranged lunatic. He doesn't even know what the hell he's talking about. He just gets obliterated in this thing. You'll see coming up on the next clip. But I want to address this because I've been kind of vehement about, the United States not being the world police. And I think the consistent through line on all this, like we look to the Middle East, right? Nobody likes what went on in the Middle East. We look at all this regime change nonsense at every single time that they fail. And we're like, this is garbage. We don't like this. But what do we say when we talk about, I don't know, South Korea? What do we say when we talk about Japan or, I don't know, Germany or Italy or any of these places where regime change has worked out great and it's been awesome? Nobody even thinks twice about these things, folks. Japan is one of our biggest allies. One of our biggest allies. And nobody ever talks about that. We only discuss the failures. That's the consistent through line, folks. It takes time to figure these things out. So if what happens in Venezuela is a massive success, which the first part was a massive success, and, kudos to the administration for being able to pull that off. Great. Now, what comes next? That's the big question, and that's going to depend on the president of the United States. That's going to depend on what Trump is going to do. Now, it seems like he's keeping the regime in place and controlling them from Washington, D.C. Will this work? That's the question. Will this work? Will this be a massive success? Can we work with Venezuela? And he's talking about going in and taking the oil. That's what Kyle Kalinski was even mentioning. Oh, they're just blatant about taking the oil. Yes, because it was adjudicated, my dude. A lot of people don't know that. When Chavez took over, they nationalized the entire country, right? So we had property in that country. Well, communists, you don't own your own property, so that's theirs. They just took our stuff. We had oil. We had refineries. We had drilling machines, equipment, all kinds of nonsense that they just took from us. That was just a reimbursement, if you will, what we took. That's why it was only X $100 million. And we didn't just go in and seize all of their means of production. Yeah, we just took what was ours. That was adjudicated a long time ago, as a matter of fact. By our courts, sure, you want to say that's biased, go right ahead. Yeah, that's fine. But the thing, once again, getting back to the point here, is will this be a success? We don't know, folks. It is looking good so far. Once again, I'm not a big fan of this, but if it's successful, hey, you won't hear any complaints from me. If it's successful. If it's not, then I'll complain about it. That at least I wish people would just admit that instead of saying, oh, well, I don't like this, or changing your position from, yeah, we don't like to be the world's police to, yay, this is great because it's Trump doing it. Like, come on, let's just be consistent here, folks, and let's keep going.
International law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal?
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked
not
at
merely
piles of millions
but it's true.
of
Woodrow
dead
Wilson
bodies,
failed
and
with
we
the
said
League of
that's a
Nations.
bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's your
problem is
criticism?
that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
you
that?
know that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question, and I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist? Do you brought up a point. You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did, in fact, fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers.
Let
Let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. Whatever his name is.
Well, and that's the
Garcia
problem, is that you're
Rodriguez
advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against a regime change.
He actually said the opposite.
I
heard Michael
Kyle, I just want to correct something.
Michael
You said I'm
Knowles
arguing for
say
a regime
the
change.
regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little BS.
Yes, but he made the point that the regime is still... He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way America would prefer for its national security than Maduro. So that's what Michael said. He didn't advocate regime change. Let me bring in Coleman Hughes. Coleman,
kidnapping the president is
well,
not
hang on, Carl. Let me bring in
regime change.
Coleman.
Kyle Kalinske and Michael Knowles are just on completely different levels. He should have never showed up to that debate, to be honest with you, because he's trying to debate intellectuals, and it just doesn't work when all he can do is levy accusations of subservience at Michael Knowles, and that's pretty much it. And talk about World War II and thousands of people died. Like, what are you even talking about, dude? Like, seriously, it's not regime change. Technically, I mean, you want to bare bones this thing. It was a law enforcement operation, right? Once again, folks, they talk about might makes right and all this other garbage. Well, might just makes, and that's it. There's no right or wrong about any of it. It's, can you do what you set out to do and do it successfully, right? Once again, it all comes back to that. But honestly, in my opinion, they're arguing on way different levels, and Michael Knowles just schooling him right here in this little segment. But let's keep going because it gets a lot more deep.
Try to not think about these issues in terms of left versus right or Trump versus the opposition, and try to take each issue on its own terms. So let's do that. Venezuela. If the policy here is actual regime change, in other words, not just decapitating Maduro and replacing Maduro with a second worst alternative, if we were to actually affect regime change in Venezuela, that would almost certainly be a good thing for the people of Venezuela and for American interests. Now, if we're going to do this half measure where we just decapitate Maduro and replace him with someone just as bad and then get a bunch of oil, well, that would at best be probably neutral for the Venezuelan people. It would be an enormous waste of U.S. military resources, and I would be very critical of the Trump administration. The truth is, I don't know which path we're going down, right? It's very early.
Right.
We're getting different signals from Trump depending on the day, different signals from Rubio, and anyone who's confidently prognosticating that they know which path we're going down probably doesn't know what they're talking about. As for Greenland, I think the truth is Trump is extraordinarily reckless in his rhetoric here. We have a situation where we have an ally in Denmark, a NATO ally. We have deep relationships with Greenland already. We have a military base. We have mineral connections. And so the idea of taking Greenland by force against the will of the people who live there is absolutely ridiculous. Now, that said, if we were to purchase it, I think that'd be a good thing. It'd have to happen with their consent. They would have to want it.
Right.
And I would welcome them as an American, but we absolutely cannot take it by force.
Right. See, that to me, Dave Smith, is part of the interesting part of all this, is that it's how this plays out. It's what actually Trump really wants to do. If he doesn't take, for example, what China has been doing in Africa for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. It's been going around Africa pretty quietly, actually, unless you're actually in Africa. And it's been doing endless commercial deals with African countries where they go in, they spend a lot of money on infrastructure and hospitals and bridges and roads and all these things. And in return, they get access to huge amounts of minerals. And that's been going on for 20 years. And that's a kind of economic imperialism. I see no ideological difference between that and what Trump is potentially talking about with Greenland, which is clearly incredibly important strategically, from a security point of view, from a mineral point of view, and so on. And there are only 60,000 people who live there, and it may well be that they're happy to do a deal if the price is right, in which case, what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I pretty much agree with Coleman, I guess, on that. Like, if it's voluntary, then okay. I don't really know enough about Greenland to really speak on it intelligently, but I could not disagree more with the take on Venezuela. And I think it's crazy, Piers. I also think, it just after the last 25 years, and I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the idea that we're just talking about regime changes in Iran and Venezuela and saying it would undoubtedly be a good thing if this regime were to fall. Well, maybe, but there's a really important question of what comes next. And if you want to say that, we've had a long history of regime changes in Latin America that have been disastrous too. We overthrew a communist government in the 50s in Guatemala, led to a civil war where hundreds of thousands of people died. So the idea that it's a guarantee that it would be a good thing if either one of these regimes fell, we certainly don't know that. And one of the other things we know is that you really don't get much of a say in what replaces the regime that falls unless you're willing to militarily occupy the country. And we've had regime change. We might be able to affect a full regime change without a military occupation, as we did in Libya, as we did in Syria. But those are not great examples where the country worked out. I mean, Syria is hanging on by a hair, and Libya is an absolute catastrophe. I mean, so it's just like, it's very reckless when you start playing. You start dropping bombs on human beings, you start toppling governments, you start kidnapping or taking, leaders of countries. There's unintended consequences that come with all of these things. That's probably the one lesson in all of this military history, is that nobody is smart enough to predict exactly what's going to come next. And so I just think it's, I see this with the situation in Iran. I say Michael Knowles are there. It's like, guys, it's like you hoist up the mission accomplished banner 2 days after the strike. We have absolutely no idea what's going to come of this. Obviously, in the situation in Iran, just right in front of all of our eyes, Piers, the goalposts have moved from 60% enriched uranium, which is what me and Coleman were arguing about a few months ago. That's out the window now, right? Nobody even cares about or is pretending there's a nuclear threat. Donald Trump's bragging about how it's obliterated. Then both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump moved the goalpost to intercontinental ballistic missiles, and then that was the war propaganda for a couple months there. Now it's over whether they shoot protesters or rioters. Not even like an accusation that they're committing a genocide or are a threat to another country. They invaded their neighbor, nothing like that. So I would just say, I think one of the most important lessons, and Michael, who's a history buff, would know that every last one of the founders of this country talked about this all the time, is that you want to be sober and calm and rational. You want to not intervene when you don't need to. There's all types of unintended consequences that can come from these things. And that's why the advice of the founders was, be friends with the world. Don't get into entangling alliances. Don't search for monsters to destroy, to fight unnecessary wars. These are all wars of choice.
Well, speaking of the founders and the American relation to foreign affairs, what was our first big international war? Was it the Iraq War? Was it the Gulf War?
You're talking about the Barbary Pirates or whatever. I don't know.
You're right. I'm talking about 1801, Dave, and it was actually our founding fathers who waged that war.
Okay, but Dave,
So it goes back to
right
Jefferson waged the war. Whatever. We don't have real time to get into that, but sure, we got 5 wars here.
We have plenty of time, Dave, but you don't want to get into it because it undercuts your argument.
No, I'm happy, Michael. If you want to come on my podcast, I'll do 2 hours on the Barbary Wars with you. The point is that we're trying to talk about the 5 conflicts going on right now. Sure.
Okay, let me address the Venezuela point.
Sure.
Dave.
Let me see. Coleman might have something smart to say.
Personally, I would love to see that debate myself. But, getting back to this, once again, it all boils down to can we be successful? And what that would actually mean is employing significant resources into that country to make sure and steer them in the correct direction. And nobody really wants to see that, folks. Nobody wants to see that. I mean, Dave is kind of right. It does take a military occupation, or at least at the bare minimum, a military presence to make sure the country goes in the direction that we want them to go. And, this is always all about exerting influence over our neighbors, exerting influence over the entire world if we got to. Might just makes. It's not necessarily right because it could be wrong. Right? Might makes wrong as well because it's just the might. Can we do this? Right? You can make all the arguments you want to, whether we should or we shouldn't. But the question always comes down to, are we successful or is it an ultimate failure? Did we go in to Afghanistan and Iraq and not spend $7 trillion, right? To have nothing. Like, the outcome was completely opposite of what we set out to do. What was the intent? It's completely opposite of that. We got no democracy, and it's still a hellscape, for crying out loud. They're still living in the 1850s. So, that's the thing, folks. I think the people went in with the intent to do good. We're going to be treated as liberators. And what happened, folks? The Taliban is running Afghanistan right now, currently. We thought we obliterated the Taliban. We didn't put enough resources into that, I think. It's also personally, I think going into Muslim or, Islamic nations is just a bad idea in general. Because if you look at the history of Islam, folks, and this is not me being mean, I'm not trying to be cute or anything, but that religion itself in predominant Muslim areas, right, they promote incest. I know it's rough to say, right? It's bad, but that's the truth on the ground. And, we've got 1,500 years of history of Islam promoting that. And, that's known. There's been studies done about this, that knocks down IQ points. And that's not just, a couple of points here and there. It's a compounding factor, folks. This is why you get countries like Yemen and Somalia with an average IQ of 69 or 68, whatever it may be, folks. That you can't go in and build a democracy based with a bunch of, not being mean, a bunch of idiots. You just can't do that, right? So at least South America, we've got a lot of smart people down there. Sure, look, the gangs need to be cleaned up, but you also have to have a movement from the people themselves. They have to want regime change, like what's going on in Iran right now. Look, I think we should leave Iran alone, to be honest with you. I don't think we need any sort of intervention going on over there. Let them do their thing, right? Now, Venezuela, I hold a different opinion because once again, the reasons for going into that, you can use all the excuses you want. First it was the drug boats, like how Dave was making all the arguments, like they keep shifting the goalposts, right? Like with Venezuela, first it was the drug boats. Well, that was a whole separate issue. Right, that's to slow down the drugs coming. That was also to intimidate Venezuela. Because like I've said before in the past a bunch of times, if they wanted to go after the drugs, we would invade Mexico. Which, to be honest with you, the administration is mulling over right now. So that might happen. You never know, folks. But, it was the drugs at first. And sure, there were some drugs coming from Venezuela. And, the operations in South America, that's a whole nother thing with the drugs. There is a lot of that going on. It's just, does that make it to the United States? Not really, not anymore. Not in significant amounts, right? Like I think 10%, which is kind of significant, but it's not nearly to the amount that Mexico, like the most of it comes from Mexico, right? So once again, but we also had an indictment. We had an arrest warrant for Maduro. Now, does that give us the right to, no, of course not. You got international law, but international law is utterly meaningless, to be honest with you. Like, sure, you could say, oh, well, it means this and that and blah, 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 blah. But it's utterly meaningless because, once again, might makes. And if might makes international law irrelevant, it's going to do that, folks. But for the most part, international law to me is just simply guidelines by which countries should at least try to abide by. But if Venezuela was violating international law and we go in and take out their leader because we have an indictment, because they're running drugs into our country, because they've slighted us, right? There's many boxes we could check as to the reasons why we went into Venezuela, like oil being one of them, resources, folks. Countries have been fighting over resources. That's the main reason for most wars, for crying out loud. Resources, right? They stole a lot of our oil. They stole a lot of our equipment. Just right out from underneath us. Just snatched, took it away. Boom, there you go. We've got an indictment from Maduro. He sent millions of his own citizens to crash test their way all the way into the United States and then start causing chaos to drain our resources as well, right? You got Tren de Aragua running roughshod over the country. So there were many reasons why we should go into there. They were significantly affecting us. That's where I think intervention is, I'm not going to say warranted, but I'm apathetic about intervention in Venezuela. Like, go right ahead. If you think it's necessary, Trump, go right ahead. That's in our neighborhood. It's a whole hell of a lot better to me than trying to go into Afghanistan for no apparent reason, right? If you want to get the ringleader of the people that took down the Twin Towers, that's a different story, right? Going to get Osama bin Laden does not involve invading Afghanistan and Iraq. That's weird, right? That was something totally different. So, the excuses that we get also hinge upon how successful was this and how willing are the people to accept what is going on. I think that plays a significant part in this. A lot of people are going to, they're going to whine and cry and gnash their teeth about it. And some people are going to just, yay, I'm glad we're doing this. Yeah, for this reason, and this reason. But folks, it all comes down to it in the end. Once again, are we successful? And what do we seek to gain out of this? Are we going to gain resources? Are we going to gain an ally? Those are significant concerns that people have. And those are questions that should be answered by the administration. But, a government's going to do what a government's going to do. But I got another section, so let's keep going.
So let me ask you this, because this point resonated with me this week, which I thought was a powerful one. If America looks like it's just ignoring international law, if it thinks it can just go into Venezuela, kidnap the president, put him in a courtroom in New York, act with impunity, take Greenland if it wants, etc., what is to stop America's enemies using the exact same argument to do what the hell they like? For example, Vladimir Putin must be sitting there going, well, hang on, every argument about why I invaded Ukraine, that's just gone up in smoke, isn't it? I mean, it's the same argument. I wanted to do it. It's in my national security interest. You've got the President Xi probably looking at it going, well, why can't I take Taiwan then? If the Americans can take Greenland because it's in their national security interest, then I want Taiwan. And how difficult does it then become for the West and America leading the West to take any high moral ground or to stop it happening in any way if they've already trampled on international law themselves?
I think that first of all, I disagree with the premise, but second of all, I think my ideological friends on this panel seem to be quite mistaken about a basic premise here, which is they seem to believe that the United Nations or something is what keeps our enemies from running roughshod over the world, American interests and other people's. That's not true. You know what stops our enemies? We do. The might of the United States is what stops us. Now, the reason I disagree with your fundamental premise is I don't think that we violated international law in the removal of Maduro. First of all, the Monroe Doctrine, now the Donroe Doctrine, has been the cornerstone of American foreign policy basically since the beginning. But two, there was a legal predicate for the removal of Maduro that goes back to a court order in 2020. And this has really gone back about 25 years now. Let us not forget it was the Biden-Harris administration and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who called for the the arrest of Maduro and actually offered $25 million to anyone who could advance it. So the only difference between the Republican action here and what the Democrats called for just 1 year ago is that Trump was actually able to do it, and he saved $25 million doing
why
it. So
should but by that
that's
logic,
the argument.
but
That's
by
the
that,
argument that Trump got
logic,
Biden's policy done.
Well, by that logic, Michael, why should President Xi not be able to go into Taiwan and take the leader and put him in a Chinese courtroom? By that logic.
Can I address that, Piers?
He's got no answer, Piers.
I'm happy to answer.
Well,
let Michael answer.
I can stop interrupting before. Yes. So the only reason that Xi has not gone into Taiwan so far is because the United States has told Xi not to. From the point of international law, there is also another confusion because international law is a real thing. Many of my fellow conservatives want to pretend that there is no such thing as international law and that might merely makes right, but that's not true. Law is an ordinance of reason, so we can actually know something about it and it objectively exists even though it's not material. However, what passes for international law these days, specifically over the last 100 or so years, is a bunch of liberal gobbledygook nonsense, which even my friend here, Kyle Kulinski, points at doesn't work, which is why the League of Nations failed and the UN has largely failed. So there is such a thing as natural law, but it is effected through political powers. And right now, the only thing stopping Xi from going into Taiwan, the only thing that has stopped Vladimir Putin from running roughshod over Ukraine is not some abstract concept in the clouds. It's the might of the United States empire and our allies around the world. And that is what will continue to stop them.
But I don't think, Carl, I will bring you in now, but I don't think that it has stopped Putin running roughshod over Ukraine. He just invaded it.
He hasn't taken the country yet.
Well, he invaded it and took as much as he could, but the Ukrainians have put up a much bigger fight than he thought they could. But I don't think Putin's intentions have been remotely thwarted by anything America's
Well, he only
done.
invaded because of Biden. So, frankly, had Trump stayed, I don't think he would have even invaded. But it's true. He did he was able to run some roughshod over it during Joe Biden. But there was no floating international law. Let's not forget, he invaded before the supposedly awful attack on Venezuela.
But he has. I mean, look. But the thing is, Michael, Putin has continued to act with total impunity in Ukraine, regardless of anything Donald Trump has said publicly, either in a friendly or unfriendly manner. He doesn't seem to care. I think if Putin could take the whole of Ukraine tomorrow, he'd take it. I think that's always been his ambition.
That's my point, I guess. That's my point. I don't think that America's very successful strike on Venezuela is going to do one thing. Now, it will not change one iota of Putin's calculation.
No, but that's my point. My point to you is that when it comes to Taiwan, I'm not sure that American power is the limiting factor for the calculations by people who run countries like Russia and China that you seem to think it is. Because I think Xi would have looked at Ukraine and thought, well, what's America actually done to stop Putin taking as much as he can?
Do you think that international law is going to limit Chairman Xi?
Well, no, I don't actually. I do think
you.
the concept of international law has been twisted and torn apart so badly that I'm actually uncertain what it really means anymore. Because people don't seem to... I mean, if you look at what Israel's done in Gaza, I would say they've trampled over international law with utter impunity, and they don't care.
Reasonable minds can differ, but I agree that's a good point on the
they can't.
murkiness of international law.
Yeah, okay, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find this whole conversation preposterous because the idea that we're the moral arbiter of anything is honestly laughable. Trump is himself a criminal. He was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's covering for a billionaire pedophile cabal as we speak. We armed and funded a genocide in Gaza. We also armed and funded a genocide committed by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. If there's any country on earth where there's some semblance of a sound argument to do regime change, it's our regime being changed. So I don't want to open the door to this might makes right, law of the jungle nonsense. And everybody else except Dave, seemingly on the panel, is in favor of that. And
America has a mechanism. Kyle, hang on. America has a mechanism for regime change. It's called the election every 4 years. And the truth is, Americans had a good, long, hard look at...
You're making my point.
Well, no, I'm not.
This is my point.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying you live in a free democratic society with free democratic elections. That's why Trump won in 2016. That's why he lost in 2020, whatever he wants people to think. And that's why he won again in 2024. That is regime change, how it should happen.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's the dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him. So the whole conversation is absurd. We're in no position to be the world police or the moral arbiters. In fact, Trump himself literally says this is about the oil. It's about the natural resources. It's about stealing that for the corporations and the billionaires. So the whole conversation about,
well, I think it could be. I actually think I think Venezuela can be about a number of things at the same time. That's why I think nuance is an important factor in these things. It can be.
But that's the
hang on, Kyle.
Can it just be pointed out?
It could be about oil. It could be about oil. It could be about Maduro being a gangster. It can be about a number of things.
This was
Trump's a gangster.
sold to us.
Trump's a gangster.
All right. Isn't it funny that we have this whole conversation, and while you're saying it could be about all these things, you know what no one's bringing up? Drugs. And that's what it was sold to us as.
Right.
Just like all these other wars, they just lie through their teeth. It has nothing to do with the drug problem, or a tiny fraction of it, and nothing to do with the fentanyl problem, which is the real crisis. It's a total pretext for war. And I got to say, man, by the way, I kind of agree with Michael on the concept of international law. But the thing about it is that this is totally illegal by our own law, by the Constitution of the United States of America, which every politician puts their hand on a Bible and swears before all of us to God that they will do everything in their power to defend and execute. There was no imminent attack here. Donald Trump had all the time in the world to go to Congress and get permission for this, and he just didn't want to. And if you want to just say, like, by the way, Mike, it's funny because you point out I'm a libertarian or Kyle's a leftist. Ironically, we're the only ones taking the conservative position here on this. We are not an empire.
So?
Actually, the Supreme, yes, that's actually right. There's a long tradition. Do you know your history on this, Michael?
There's a long tradition of libertarians telling conservatives what we believe. I'm sick of it for one.
No. There's a long tradition of the best conservatives having the exact same foreign policy I do, and then a bunch of former communists who were atheists convinced you guys that it was right-wing to support wars everywhere. By the way, the Monroe Doctrine...
They convinced Thomas Jefferson in 1801. I don't know about that.
No. I'm not talking about the Barbary Wars. Okay, anyway.
Or the Monroe administration, or the Roosevelt administration.
Dude, do you even know what the Monroe Doctrine is? You say the Monroe Doctrine means that we get to run our hemisphere? No, it doesn't.
No,
the Monroe Doctrine.
We keep our
Michael, let me finish a thought, and then you can respond to it. No, that's not actually true. It meant that Europe couldn't have any more colonies here, and in turn, we wouldn't interfere in Europe. By the way, it's not a law. It's something a president said once in a speech, and it hasn't been the cornerstone of our foreign. It hasn't been. Have we not interfered in Europe? Have we not interfered in Europe for over 200 years? Is that what you're telling me, Michael?
And then we became the world empire.
That's true. Right,
yeah.
exactly. So we abandoned the Monroe Doctrine. We never followed it at all. And the Monroe Doctrine never said, they said that Europe couldn't establish more colonies. They already had several, that they couldn't establish more colonies. It didn't say that if there's a country that does a mineral deal with a country somewhere else because we won't allow our companies to do it with them, that therefore we can topple the leader. This is completely illegal by our own Constitution.
I'm happy to explain this. It's true. In 1823, the Soviet Union did not yet exist, and other adversaries around the world did not yet exist. We have expanded the notion that European powers, which were a threat to us, should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere to those other adversaries as well, who you recognize are adversaries. It seems to me where the big difference here on the panel is that you, Dave, at least will acknowledge that America has interests and there are bad regimes. You're making some crazy claims that the Constitution doesn't allow the United States to be commander-in-chief of the army. You're making a crazy claim that Congress...
No, I'm not. I'm saying it doesn't allow them to declare a war.
You're making a crazy claim that it was... Excuse me. You're making a crazy claim that it was somehow illegal to follow a court order from 2020 to take out Maduro and arrest him. Anyway, you're making all sorts of crazy claims.
Is that how we do foreign policy, by court order?
Hold on one second, guys. Yes. 1 second. I'm happy to... the difference here is, Dave, you at least acknowledge America has interests. And you're saying because we sometimes make mistakes... Hold on 1 second. I'm just trying to get my point out. Because we sometimes make mistakes, you're saying that we should not pursue those interests, or you're saying that the consequences could be worse. The point that Kyle is making is actually different from yours. Kyle's point is that America has interests, and we should oppose those interests because he thinks that America is the great Satan or something.
I'm actually making an argument.
Thank you for the straw man. I'm actually making an argument.
We're running a bit out of time.
To Dave's point right there, where he asked, have we interfered in European affairs? Yeah, only when we were asked to. Like World War II, we were asked to come into that. They were begging us to get involved in that war. Like, I'm not sure where the through line is right here, where his logic is congealing into, some sort of position or something like that, but he's just against intervention. That's it. I think that's the only through line that he's got. He's just against intervention, and that is a naive place to be, folks. Like, to say that we should not get involved, right? Once again, it goes back to, sure, he was correct about the Monroe Doctrine, right? But he was also incorrect. He's coming from a different position, right? He's correct about what it says. But what does that mean? That also means, basically, when you boil everything down, that we control our hemisphere. And, not having any European colonies is correct. Yes, that is what it means. But that's ultimately, it means we're going to control our hemisphere. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be a dictatorial force over the entire half of the damn world, for crying out loud. No, it just means that we're going to try to work with all these countries in a cohesive fashion. And if there's any sort of abnormalities that stick out, any cancerous tumors, that, hey, look, we can deal with that and have everything working like a well-oiled machine on this side of the planet. Like, going back to what they were talking about, like, the reason China hasn't invaded Taiwan, I think it is because of the United States. The reason, Putin even said this himself, the reason, he said, if Donald Trump would have been in office, he would not have invaded Ukraine. That says everything right there. That is a direct quote from Putin himself. That tells you a lot about American might. And what Biden was exuding from America was nothing but weakness. Absolute and utter weakness. That was just an incompetent administration. It was incompetency by design, folks. Outright by design. I could go off all day on that, but I want to get to some other points. Kind of like Dave's point on what he calls a war. He has a very broad definition of what a war is. Like, he considers what we did in Iran a war. Striking nuclear enrichment facilities, that is a war. What happened in Venezuela, that was a war. I'm sorry. To me, a war was Iraq, was what Afghanistan was. Those were wars. World War II was a war. Us going and bombing someplace, that's not a war. Sure, you're blowing stuff up, but I don't consider that a war, to be honest with you. Like, Venezuela was not a war. Like, he kind of, Michael kind of gets him on that, but I love that debate right there, going back and forth, because they kind of both get each other a little bit. But it ultimately boils down to, all of this boils down to it. International law doesn't matter. Our Constitution doesn't matter, because people will use the Constitution when it's politically advantageous for them to do so. It's all about what the people are willing to tolerate, folks. Seriously, that's what it boils down to. If Trump will start to just go rogue and start doing a bunch of stuff that the vast majority of America disagreed with, he would be impeached. He would be removed by some means. We just don't know exactly what. But if he were to just go completely rogue, and the vast majority of Americans, I'm talking like 95, 99% of Americans were enraged by what Trump was doing, he would be removed immediately. Like, seriously. Like, you might think, oh, that's kind of far-fetched, but we've never had that kind of agreement to remove somebody before. But, what it all boils down to is whoever has the biggest military and are willing to use that military, right? Like, just like laws. The laws are only as good as the people who are willing to enforce them, right? So if the American population, America as a whole, has the will to back going to take out a dictator, a communist dictator, and remove him from power, then, hey, that's what's going to happen, folks. That's exactly what's going to happen, and we're going to do what we want. That's the same thing with, like, China. If they felt that they could take Taiwan with impunity, there would be no consequences to that. Who cares about international law? Like, international law, like, literally, it exists, but it doesn't really matter. I'll put it that way. Once again, they have no enforcement mechanism at all. Now, it would come into effect if, once again, the rest of the world was intolerant of what America was doing. Intolerant enough to sanction us, to stop trade with us, to basically isolate us. Then that would become a problem, right? We can all agree to that. But until that happens, until we go to war with the entire world, I don't think international law is going to matter to people that are above it, in other words, with military might, right? If we have more military might, then the world can tolerate breaking of international law. It's on a graph, basically. then I think we can get away with just about whatever we want to. Just about, right? We can only go so far, but once that tolerance meter starts coming up to meet that international law, then we're going to have problems, folks. But I've got another section on what happened up in Minnesota, and once again, I've got a nuanced view, and I think it's the correct one, but let's get into it.
I talked about both sides taking sort of implacable, incendiary positions. You compared ICE agents to Nazis, described the officer as an ICE thug who murdered a woman on camera by shooting her in the face. I mean, you're determining there that what we have watched with our own eyes, because we got the benefit of seeing all the videos, is somebody making a deliberate calculation to murder that woman for no reason.
I think he did. And
Why
I
would
think
you
if you
do
study
that?
the video closely, well, I'll explain it to you. So first of all, these guys are all roided up freaks. Let's point that out, that these are like Proud Boys and white nationalists and the dregs of society who have now been given a gun and a badge.
Well, that's a ridiculous generalization. And again, I don't think that helps.
Let me finish
but that
talking,
kind
and
of
then you can talk.
generalization
You wanna
doesn't help
disrupt
your
the point?
argument. It makes you sound
No,
equally
but I don't-
deranged.
No. I don't care about convincing
Much
you
more
guys
deranged.
with your cult of fake nuance. I care about speaking to the American people who saw with
God
their eyes
forbid we
what's
should have
happening.
nuance.
Yeah, because it's fake nuance. That's the problem. You have J.D. Vance out there saying that this guy, it should have absolute immunity. Absolute immunity. So
I
if he
don't agree.
rapes somebody, he should be able to get off. This is fucking
mean, she hit
ridiculous.
him with her
Absolute
car.
immunity.
I don't
we went
agree.
From nobody's above the law in this country.
Nor do I think, Kyle, nor do I think that Renee Good was deliberately trying to run over this ICE officer. I just don't think that
Okay,
there's
and the
any
guy was
evidence
trying to kill her.
that she was trying to do that or to cause him
Correct,
bodily
she
harm.
wasn't.
I think it was quite clear from the wheel positioning that she was trying to drive away. And the guy
Hold on, Piers,
was
you're
ignoring
right.
his training
That's right. And
to
here's the
stand
thing,
in front
Piers,
of her.
if you
And
watch
he had
closely-
a past incident which probably in the moment made him fear the same thing was going to happen.
Piers, I
and he
just
shot
hold
her.
on. We have to have one
If you
factual
watch
correction
closely,
here.
All right, Michael.
Just
excuse
one
me,
little bit to
excuse me.
inject some
I
facts.
literally
literally
One second,
never
Kyle.
even made
We
the
just need
fucking
one little
point I was
correction
trying
here.
to
All
make
right,
at the
don't talk at the
beginning.
same time.
And
The
you guys are
wheels
talking
were
over
aimed
me.
at the cop when
Let
she
me-
accelerated.
All right, Kyle,
wheels
I'll
were
come
aimed
back
at
to you.
the
Let-
cop when she accelerated.
Kyle, I will come back to you. Let Michael just interject on this one point. Michael.
This is really important because I feel sorry for the woman. It's very sad that she died. I'm not in any way happy that she died. She was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, "Drive, baby, drive, drive." The lesbian partner then said, "It's my fault. I told
Why
her
is
to
it
be out
relevant
here."
that she's a lesbian?
Hold on one
Michael?
second.
Why is
Well,
that
no, hang
relevant?
on.
Because she's
But
the
Michael,
partner and I
no,
don't
no,
You
have
Kyle,
interrupted me
don't
now. I'm
talk-
interrupting.
Kyle,
Why is it relevant that
calm
she's
down.
a
One
lesbian?
second, Kyle. I'm just trying to have
Actually,
a
I would
conversation.
say
that you're unfamiliar with.
I would say it's irrelevant that she's a lesbian. Secondly, drive can be an entreaty to drive away, which is what I think she was doing. Thirdly, the demeanor of Renee Good in the final video that came out shows somebody pretty calm, certainly not confrontational, certainly doesn't look to me like somebody intent on mowing down an ICE officer.
Piers,
I think
hit
she
him
just
with her
wanted
car.
to get out of
Are
there.
you suggesting, Piers, hold on, are you suggesting that because a woman says, "I'm not mad," that means she isn't mad? I think anyone who's ever interacted with a woman knows that's not what that phrase means. Second of all, we don't have to just judge by her words. She accelerated. You can look at it in the footage while the tires are aimed at the cop. And this is a message.
leave.
I feel bad for her. She was indoctrinated into thinking that you're allowed to drive your car at cops or disobey police orders or block traffic and create a dangerous situation. This is an important message to all the leftists out there who want to do this. You cannot drive your SUV into a police officer. If you do that, you will be shot in the face and deserve
She
it,
didn't.
and it will be very, very sad.
All right, Kyle, back to you.
I love that we're now doing character assassination of a 37-year-old soccer mom who got shot in the face 3 times. You're fucking disgusting
tried
for
to
doing that,
run
and you
over
know that
a
you're
police
disgusting for
officer.
doing
I'm not
that. And
assassinating
if you
her
watch the
character, I'm
video
describing what
closely, he switches hands with his phone to prepare to grab his gun before he was in any danger whatsoever. Okay, so this
clearly
guy,
he was in
knew what
danger.
he was
She hit
doing.
him.
He knew what he was getting himself into. These people are looking for trouble. They are going to Minneapolis. They are cracking skulls. They are rounding up innocent people.
These people
They
are
absolutely
looking
are
for
Trump's
trouble when they
Gestapo,
try
and
to
everybody
obstruct law
knows it.
enforcement. You're right.
You know, I guess Kyle Kalinske just cannot refrain from levying character assassination accusations at anybody he disagrees with. Folks, look, I'm going to break this down. You might think I'm going to line up with Michael Knowles right there, but I don't. None of that matters. Everything you just heard, all those arguments back and forth about her demeanor, about where he was at, what was he doing what he should have been doing, was he, violating the law or violating their policy, none of that matters, folks. The only thing that matters in this situation right here is pretty much, did he feel like his life was in danger? And if we have enough evidence for a reasonable doubt to believe that he could feel that his life was threatened because there's a 2,000-pound vehicle that just revved up its engines, tires spinning out, and it's coming at him, did he feel like his life was threatened? If the answer to that is there's enough reasonable doubt, yes, then that's all that matters, folks. Her demeanor doesn't matter, like I said. Her not supposed to be there, that doesn't matter. Was she a domestic terrorist? That's irrelevant, folks. That, I can't stand that because they both immediately jump to the extremities on this. Both sides immediately jump to the extreme. You got one side calling her a domestic terrorist, which is nonsensical. The other side saying he's a blatant murderer just running around just looking to kill American citizens. That's even more deranged. It's all garbage, all of it. The only thing that matters is, did he feel like his life was threatened? I just can't stand this, folks. Look, we've got a tragedy to deal with. And anybody out there making light of this is not what we should be doing as Christians or as just people in general. We should never make light of death. Regardless of how deranged or how much of a lunatic you think that lady was, it doesn't matter. We should not make light of death. We should not make fun of these people. You can think that, yeah, she shouldn't have been there, which I agree with. You want my opinion on this? I think she injected herself into a situation, and when it got to the point to where she was about to get arrested, she got scared and attempted to flee. That's clear from all the video. I don't understand why Michael's getting into this mindset of, well, the wheels were turned. That doesn't matter. None of that matters. The wheel direction doesn't matter because the cop can't see the wheel direction from his advantage point. And anybody that wants to say, well, he shouldn't have been standing in front of the vehicle. He wasn't. That's a lie. He was walking around the vehicle, filming the vehicle, so they could identify that specific vehicle later if she did flee. That's what he was doing. He was just walking around the vehicle, filming it to get scratch marks, dents, if you got a missing headlight or whatever it may be, right? That's what he was doing. That's police policy for the most part, right? To say he shouldn't have been standing in front of that, sure, we can say that, but that's irrelevant. Again, she shouldn't have been there in the first place. I could debunk that argument because if she doesn't inject herself into an ongoing immigration enforcement operation, he doesn't have the chance to walk around the vehicle and be in front of the vehicle where he should not be. Once again, those two nullify each other out by she shouldn't have been there. She was impeding a federal investigation, for crying out loud, federal operations. It's ridiculous to say any of the mistakes that ICE made are nullified by that fact, if you want to get into opinions. But none of that is really relevant, folks. What we should look at, once again, is did he feel like his life was threatened? And anybody looking at this objectively from a rational standpoint will have to say there is reasonable doubt to think that his life was threatened, right? There's reasonable enough evidence to see that he could possibly feel that way. And if that is the case, you're never going to get a murder conviction. You're never going to get a manslaughter conviction. You're never going to get any sort of conviction at all. At all, because that's reasonable, justified self-defense. It is what it is. Case freaking closed. We can stop all the arguments. You might not like what ICE is doing. So what? That doesn't matter. ICE might make a ton of mistakes. Doesn't matter. It's all opinionated nonsense, folks. So just opinions. It is what it is. You can like ICE. You can hate ICE. Doesn't matter. These people should not be getting in the way of ICE. That was not a protester. All right. Once again, I tend to lean toward that, yeah, she was kind of at a very, 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 probably the lowest level you can get to of a domestic terrorist, because, once again, she was impeding a federal investigation. She was part of a group that is their whole reason for existence. That's insane to me. Right? All of these people, quote unquote, protesting, it's just a giant waste of time. Can people not see this? Seriously. Can they not see that this is a complete waste of time to get out in the streets and protest ICE? Do you think that's going to make them stop? Once again, anybody that thinks about this for a second can see that people that are outside of this situation, looking at it from the outside, can look at these people and think, well, they probably thought that none of this protesting is going to stop them. So what have they resorted to? They've resorted to injecting themselves into these situations and forcibly trying to stop it, which is a violation of the law, and they should be arrested. But once again, it's a waste of freaking time. That's why they're having to resort to these measures, because protest doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can go to a federal building and protest these people, but what good is that going to do? It's not going to stop the administration. So it's 100% waste of time. And once again, anybody looking at that from the outside in is going to see that as these people are just self-serving. They just want to signal their virtue to everybody that they don't agree with what's going on. That's all that looks like to anybody that's on the outside looking at that. So anybody that's just signaling their virtue to anybody that injects themselves into this, yeah, we're going to think you need to be arrested. We're going to think you're just there to terrorize ICE. That's all you're doing. You're just an anarchist at that point. So there you go. There's my rationale for that. But once again, none of that really matters to the case. It's a tragedy, folks. Look, and we don't need any more American citizens getting shot in the freaking face because they wanted to inject themselves into a dangerous situation. Please, if you know anybody that's getting out there and doing this, stop them from doing it. Try to rationalize this to them. Try to make them stop. ICE is not going to stop doing what. That's the main reason Trump was voted into office. Do you really believe they're not going to stop? Their budget was just increased. They are not going to stop. Get out of their way. They are just eliminating criminal elements from this country, enforcing the laws that are on the books. Once again, it would make more sense for these people to lobby Congress to change those laws than it would for these people, than it would make sense for these people to get out there and protest ICE. Seriously. It makes more logical sense to try to change the law than it does to try to stop the enforcement mechanism. It's ridiculous, folks, but that's all I got. Yeah, you guys let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comments section. Don't forget, smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. And click the join button. Sign up and become a member, folks. That's the best way to help this channel expand and grow. And look, you know, I'm a raging Christian. I proclaim that all day long. I'm a Christian. So right now, what this country needs more of, we need calm heads, rational minds. So if you're going to do anything, please pray for peace over these people. Please pray for peace over this nation. Pray that ICE can do their job and not do the wrong thing. They can try to eliminate as many mistakes as possible. Pray for that, because we don't need ICE breaking the law. We don't need them, doing things they're not supposed to be doing. And we definitely don't need people putting themselves in dangerous situations where they get killed. We need to pray mostly for those people to calm down. We really need peace over this nation, folks, and peace over the world. Pray for your neighbors. Pray for your friends. Pray for everybody. That's what I would say, folks, because we need it right now. We need prayer more than any time, I think, or at least in a very long time, folks. We need a lot of it. So you guys do that. Y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.